Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my Sunday Reflections. I'm Elsa Marie De Silva, founder and CEO of Red Dot Foundation. And today is my last Sunday reflection for the year. I've done 75 episodes, 50 of daily reflections at the peak of COVID 19, and then 25. This is the 25th episode of Sunday Reflections. And it's the last one for this year. So, what are Sunday reflections? It's just, bringing a guest from one of my networks to talk about their work. But today we have a very special guest. She's my cousin, Dr. Maryann Noronha. How are you, Maryann?
Good, thank you, Elsa. Thanks very much for having me on. A Christmas special.
Yes, Christmas special. And I thought, who better to spend it with than my cousin?
Yeah.
So, can you tell us where you're logging in from and what's the situation out there?
Yeah, Elsa. So I am currently sitting in my living room in London, England. I was on shift last night, so I'm a bit baggy-eyed, so I put on some concealers just in case you were wondering. And we're gearing up for Christmas here, but as you might have heard on the news, or maybe not, I don't know quite how international news works nowadays. But yeah, we've just gone into, I can't even remember now, third or fourth lockdown here in London. So we're in a tier 4, which basically means that Christmas is cancelled for us. So there were quite a few tears. And when I got to work, everyone is feeling very, morale is low, let's say. And so it's a bit of a tough time here, but still, very lucky from, compared to lots of places. So, trying to count our blessings rather than feeling miserable.
And on behalf of everyone, I really want to thank you and all the doctors and the frontline medical staff and other frontline staff out there who are, going out there no matter what to make sure that everybody else is safe. So thank you for that.
Oh, no worries, Elsa. To be honest, it's nice to be able to have something to do and respond in a concrete way to these things. A lot of people feel very helpless sitting at home, and, it's hard, isn't it? Like, my husband sits at home and he works from home day in, day out with very little interaction, whereas I get to go to work, respond in a really concrete way, see people at work in a really, tangible way. So, I actually feel lucky to be able to go to work and do something useful. So, but, gratitude's always nice.
So I wanted to talk to you about, your work with MSF, Medicine Sans Frontiers, which is Doctors Without Borders. Can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to join them in the first place?
I don't know. So when I was a child, I'm like one of those stereotypical children that always knew what they wanted to do. When you asked me what I wanted to do when I was 3 or 4, I don't know whether you remember, Elsa, I always wanted to be a doctor. That's what I wanted to do. And that was really inspired from this TV program that I don't think you ever, maybe you didn't get it in India. I don't know. It was called Flying Doctors. It was an Australian program. Did you get it? Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think we got it when we were young, but I remember hearing about it.
Yeah, probably. Anyway, in Australia, obviously, you have your cities, but there's a lot of people who live in a lot of rural areas. And so they have this outreach service called the Flying Doctors Service, where doctors essentially respond by plane. And every episode was about, some accident that happened or someone who was sick out in the bush. And the doctors would go out in their plane, and there'd always be an adventure, and then they'd end up saving this person's life and bringing them back. And, it always ended happily ever after, as these soaps do. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a doctor, but I don't want to be like a normal doctor. I want to be having adventures along the way. I want to be going out and, going to unusual places, going to people where they are. And so that kind of was the underlying thread of my kind of desire to be a doctor. And along the way, it kind of morphed. It had different, manifestations, but essentially, it ended up with, after qualifying, deciding to volunteer for MSF, which is this excellent humanitarian organization, one of the biggest humanitarian organizations in the world, really. And yeah, it's great because, you know, it's really nice. You know, I think the travel bug runs in our family a little bit. We like to go out and about and see what, you know, the way that other people live, meet other people. And with MSF, I get to do that as well as being a medic and, you know, doing something really practical. But I end up going to places where you would never be able to go as a tourist or to visit a friend. And I get to go there and spend, you know, 3 to 6 months living with the people, really understanding how they live, what they do, getting inside a culture whilst doing a job, you know, not just a tourist. And there's a different feel to it when you do that. So yeah, that's how I ended up doing it. And I've done 3 missions so far and really enjoyed it. And hopefully we'll continue in the future at some point. So let's see.
Tell us about your first mission, because I remember receiving all those missives and I used to love, you know, reading them. So tell us a little bit about the, you know, so when you thought about a posting and when you actually went on that first one, was it as per your expectations, or it was absolutely earth-shattering till you got used to it?
Oh, it's kind of weird because my first, like, I speak no other languages other than English. So I always joke that I'm a particularly useless brown person. I speak no Hindi, no Punjab, none of those languages. So people at work are always, if someone Asian comes in and they need a translator, they're always asking me, what language do you speak, Maryann? I'm like, nothing other than English. And when you're in an international humanitarian organization, that's a real disability because they can't send you anywhere where you can speak a language. So basically my countries were fairly limited. You know, it's very useful if you speak basically French, Spanish, or an Asian language. So they initially asked me to go to Pakistan. And because I've been coming to India my entire life, in my head, Pakistan was not anywhere that different or that exotic. So I wasn't particularly feeling that nervous about it. You know, obviously, as an Indian, there's like this, you know, people think Pakistan's this very dangerous place, but because I grew up in England, I didn't have all those kind of that kind of baggage with me. So I was just quite excited to go in the initial lead up. And then I started getting all these security briefings and I had to fill out this like kidnapping form because apparently one of the big risks in Pakistan is that you get kidnapped as a foreign national because of ransom money. And I was like, maybe this isn't going to be quite like backpacking around India in my gap year or coming to see my family. Maybe this is going to be slightly different. And so I actually got sent to this place called Quetta, which is right on the border of Afghanistan. And obviously, this is, you know, we're not talking Lahore here. This is like a completely different you know, part of the country. It's very rural. It's this dusty, you know, high altitude city, which is on one of the massive passes to Afghanistan. So it has a huge refugee population. It's also where, you know, very close to where the earthquake was in Pakistan at that time. So massive displaced population of people fleeing from natural disasters, fleeing from the Afghan war, just internal strife because there's a lot of oil in that area. So there's a lot of, you know, issues that come with that. So a lot of underlying tensions that make the area quite a dangerous place. And I think my biggest shock when I got there was kind of like all the security proceedings that you had to go through. So you weren't allowed to leave the house. So you would only go literally from the house you were in to the hospital and then back again. You weren't allowed anywhere else. And if you were en route, you had to text back to like the, you know, the comms team every half an hour to say that, to register that you were still okay, just in case something had happened. And if they didn't get that text, they would text you back. And if you didn't text back to that, they'd escalate it immediately. And if you'd missed 3 texts, like suddenly it became an international incident. And so there was this massive pressure that I was just like slightly concerned that I'd trigger this international incident because I'd lost my phone or like was too involved doing something else. So, I think that was the first realization that there was something, slightly unusual. But otherwise, it was, the work was so interesting. We were setting up a pediatric hospital, which was, in England as a doctor, you just go to work and your service provision, especially, essentially as a junior doctor, you go to work, you see your patients, and then you come home again. Whereas there, like you're essentially working as a public health professional, you're kind of setting up an entire infrastructure around a healthcare facility, ordering in medication, equipment, training, hiring of staff, all those kinds of things that you would do essentially if you were managing a hospital. And it was, just an amazing opportunity for me to pick up all these skills that I'd learned in theory, but would never in the NHS or at home be given the opportunity to use until, 10 or 20 years along in my career. So, yeah, it was really good.
It's amazing experience to pick up, as well as, you're operating in conditions where you don't have all the infrastructure. Like, for example, at the NHS, you have everything that you want at your fingertips. Whereas I remember when you were setting up this hospital, not only were you in charge of the hospital, but you also had, low supplies.
Yeah.
And you may have had to, think out of the box in certain situations, because I remember you wrote about some complicated, situations, but you didn't have the necessary equipment as well. So you and your team really had to think out of the box to save the mother and the child's life in many cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's nice here and you get a delivery, DPD or FedEx arrive and they've got a nice box and you've got your vaccines in it or whatever. And there, like everything arrives in donkey and cart, and your delivery's arrived and you go outside and there's this guy with his donkey and a trailer behind it. And you're like, I am not in England anymore. So yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like there, you have to be innovative, you have to be really resourceful, and you have to think on your feet a lot. And it's kind of like you just go with you. It's really going back to basics with your medicine. You have to use your clinical skills a lot, which is, amazing because, we rely a lot on blood tests, investigations, but when all those tests and investigations cost money and you're very aware of that you are in charge of the resources and that those resources have to go a long way to treating people, it makes you have a different awareness of how you use things and you're less wasteful. And you really think, is this going to change what I do? How is this going to benefit my patient? Is this worth it? Because there's one thing, it's nice for me to know lots of things about a patient, but if it doesn't change how I treat them or what I'm going to do, then actually it's just for my own knowledge. It's not to benefit the patient, and that money could be used in a different way for a different patient. So, it just makes you think about things in a different way.
Absolutely. And there was this one, I don't think it was one incident, but, at the very start of your posting, you were getting used to having to cross the road where, your compound was on one side of the road and the hospital was on the other. And even to just cross that short distance, you had to be accompanied by security. And coming from England to this place, you had to readjust your behavior. And then at the end of your posting or somewhere in between, when the security had improved, you were allowed to cross the road. And it made you nervous.
Yeah.
And it was funny reading it from afar, but I can't help but think about COVID-19, where, we've had to unlearn so many behaviors and then now relearn. So, for example, In the last 8 months, I've only stepped out literally 5 times for a social event.
Mm.
And when I now go out, it's like, I have to, it's learned behavior, because initially staying at home was tough. But now that you've gotten used to staying at home, to unlearn and go out and meet people is a change. And a lot of people are struggling with this. So
Yeah.
what would be your recommendations, when you have these kind of extreme situations?
Mm, I can completely relate to that. It's even the other day I mean, we haven't been shopping, like clothes shopping or like that kind of activity for a really long time. And a few days ago, we went into town because we thought the shops were going to shut, and we just had our last minute Christmas shopping. And we were just like overwhelmed by the amount of people like on the street. We're like, oh my God, and it like really fills you with a bit of anxiety. But I think it's actually good to step back and just allow yourself a period of reflection or about why you're feeling that anxiety, where the uncomfortableness comes from. Don't, as people, we're actually incredibly adaptable. I think we adapt very quickly to a different way of living. It's not really surprising, is it? When you look at how we've adapted as humans. So don't push it. Don't expect yourself to suddenly go from one extreme to the other and just be like that. But it's also nice to think about whether there's a value in the way in which the change has been, forced upon you. Think, actually, is there something valuable in maybe, being a bit more on my own, or having some more time for myself, or giving some more, attention to my needs, all these things that actually I think COVID-19 have forced us to do. But I think actually when you look at it from, take a step back, there are some jewels there that I'll definitely take forwards with me. And I think that was the same thing from each of my missions. It's forced me to live in a slightly different way. But I think it's a backward step if you just come back and then just go straight back to your way of living. Each experience you have should be, there's a bit of learning there for yourself to take forwards. And it's nice to reflect on that and think, how is this, what of this experience do I want to take into my future life? So I think that's a good thing to do.
You've been on 3 missions abroad, as well as, you work with the NHS, and you're a doctor. And there are not, in totality, there are not that many women doctors. Have you faced any kind of, um, gender stereotypes, or even any kind of racism, and how have you dealt with it?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, I mean, obviously, I'm quite lucky in England in the sense that we've actually got more female doctors than we have male. So it's, definitely a reversal of the gender stereotype, in the sense that, numbers in med schools are definitely flipped in the last 10 years. So it's, but now I'm a consultant, there are definitely less people, but I'm kind of like, there's a generation of female consultants coming through, but when you look at the older generation, there are, that's definitely male dominated. So it's nice to see that change happen. There are obviously discriminations, it's, that will happen just because as you fight for the system to change, isn't it? Because it's, change always happens slowly, and you need to be pushing for the fact that, say, when you go on maternity leave, that and if you come back part-time, that time doesn't discriminate against you and your career progression, because you're spending less time at work, but it's not because you're on holiday or something like that. You need that time to be recognized, so that you don't come back disadvantaged and have lost career years, all those kinds of things that I think are really important as an institution to take into account. But definitely going as a female doctor abroad to places like, Pakistan, which is still an incredibly male dominated environment, that could be very challenging. And it's also interesting because you're challenged to look at things through different cultural perspectives. So initially I remember I was I get really cross because I was much younger then as well. So, still trying to define myself as a person or trying to define myself as a woman. So you don't quite know, I probably didn't handle myself with quite as much authority or quite as much confidence as I do now. But I remember like none of the men or the male doctors there that I was in charge of looking at me in the eye when I was speaking to them. And I remember feeling, this getting me really cross, feeling that they weren't respecting me or they weren't, acknowledging my authority, and there'd be a lot of yes, ma'am to my face, but then they'd just go and do what they wanted to do anyway. And I really got to this like breaking point. And I remember, having a bit of a rant to one of the national staff who I, could was one of the other managers. And he was like, but Maryann, you don't understand that in our culture, to look a woman in the eye is is disrespectful. Like that would be that I'm not respecting her as a person. It's actually they're respecting you by not looking at you in the eye. And, it really takes a cultural shift to understand that in different cultures, there's different ways to respect people. There's different ways that people will communicate, and one way would be rude for one culture, but polite in another. And there's all these nuances that you can only really pick up when you've been immersed in that country for a while. So, it's definitely for them was challenging having a young female boss. But actually, by the end of it, we'd reached a good working relationship. And I was actually quite impressed with how they did it, because I think it is hard when all you've known is one way and then someone comes along and completely throws it up in the air and you're forced to adjust. I'm always impressed when people actually do rise to the occasion, and sometimes we want them to come all the way all at once. But these things have to be slow movements as well, I think. So it's important to fight for what you believe in and stand your ground, but also be gentle with people, I think.
Yes, intercultural sensitivity is really important. And having that perspective, um, you know, can really smoothen the rough edges because, like you said, they were not disrespectful towards you, but, you know, it does feel odd when somebody cannot look you in the eye, and if you're used to that. But having said that, you've been to I don't know how many 100+ countries, all through your family travel as well as your own travel. You've also volunteered in many other places. I remember you went to South Africa and worked with AIDS patients. You worked in Malawi. You had an NGO with a friend, right, in Malawi, working with young girls. Tell us about, some of these experiences. What do you think has shaped you from those experiences?
I think you mentioned that, prior to all this working abroad, we traveled extensively as a family. I was incredibly blessed as a child. My mum worked for British Airways, and, as you know, working for an airline, you get all these perks of the job, which is that you get this discounted travel. And, my parents were very adventurous. So we'd be, my friends would be going to south of Spain and we'd be going to Zimbabwe for a holiday, at school. And, for us growing up, that kind of adventurous spirit was very normal. And, I'm sure you'll agree, when you travel and you spend time with people from different cultures, it opens your eyes into different ways of living, but also challenges your own perspectives, your own ideas of what's right or wrong, your own aspirations about what you want from life, because you can see that people can be happy in so many different ways. And maybe in your culture, your culture pushes a particular way to be successful or a particular way to be fulfilled. And yet you go to another place and you see people fulfilled or successful in a completely different way. And so you start to realize that actually we're not, these ideals are not as homogenous as you think they they should be if you, or you think they are when you're just living in one place. So I think that's the first thing to, and that I've taken away. The second thing is that actually I think, people are so surprising and amazing. You know, continuously amazed at when you meet patients in the countries where who have a much more disadvantaged than us, and yet they'll come to you as a doctor and they'll bring you some food, and you're like, you have no food, like this is ridiculous, why are you giving me food? Like, but that kind of gratitude, or this kind of willingness to share what you have, the kind of ability to get on with life when you've been given, very little or a difficult circumstance. All these qualities are things that I would like to have myself as a person, and I think that sometimes when we have a lot, we forget about these things. And, we feel hard done by. Yesterday when we went into tier 4, I was feeling so miserable, and I just had to reevaluate. I was like, come on, Maryann, what is going on here? So you miss Christmas, but you've got your health, you've got a family, you've got a house over your head. The people I worked with in South Sudan, they've been in a civil war situation for 15 years. How can you say you're tired after 9 months, of lockdown? Like, what right do you have? You have so many blessings. Just remember all those things, and that we can be more resilient than sometimes we feel we are. And we just have to look at these things with a different perspective, I think.
All about perspective, and I'm so grateful for my birth lottery, because definitely it would be worse off if I was born in maybe a different family. And we've all seen those pictures of the migrants walking back to their
Mm,
home, when India first issued the lockdown, which was one of the
yeah.
strictest in the world. So yeah, so we have to find gratefulness in our heart and gratitude in our heart, for whatever we have.
Mm.
So, what have you been doing in the lockdown? Did you pick up any new skills, or did you reconnect with any of your hobbies?
Well, surprisingly, I've been quite busy. For lots of people, lockdown was, at home with lots of time. But obviously, for me, I was more busy at work than usual. So obviously, I was doing that. But yeah, like there's a joke, in England, everyone seemed to get, obsessed with making sourdough, which is this kind of bread with a tang to it that comes from San Francisco. So I perfected my sourdough, done a lot of like cooking at home because the restaurants were shut, all that kind of stuff. It's actually been quite nice, in many ways. I have definitely learned a bit more about, taking care of oneself. I'm normally an incredibly busy person. And it's nice to be busy and have lots of plans and do lots of things, but actually you can end up draining yourself a lot and end up not really bringing your best to the things that you've committed yourself to. And actually, you're bringing just the dredges of yourself. You're tired, you're exhausted, you're maybe a bit irritable. Whereas actually spending a few extra days at home to, give yourself a bit of self-care means that when you do choose, what you do, rather than feeling obliged to say yes, or even sometimes judging yourself by your busyness. You think, oh, it's great, I've got all these friends, I've got all these activities, I must be like a useful, popular person. But actually, these are just, it's just superficial. Actually, it's nice to choose those things better and be a better person when you're at those things, and know how to be on your own, and be with yourself and who you are and what actually rejuvenates you. So, all those things are nice. I've taken up a bit of yoga, which is nice, and a bit more exercise, all those things that we aspire to, eating healthily. So, oh, have I lost you? Elsie, you still there?
I think I lost you
Yeah,
over
I
there
think
a
I
little
did as
bit.
well.
Yeah. Don't worry. I always ask all my guests this question. What is the advice that you would give your 16-year-old self?
um, I think I'd say don't worry about it. I think when I was 16, you worry about, well, you get your knickers in a twist about a lot of things. You know, you end up feeling, I mean, it's a teenage thing, isn't it? Like things that happen feel big and important. And actually, what I've learned is most of the time, things don't work out as you plan them to. So actually, it's best to have a few goals, have a few principles, a few, things that you know are important to you, and then just take each situation as they come. There's no point thinking, oh, in 2 years' time, I want to do this, because you just have no idea what's going to happen in 2 years' time. And then if you have this fixed idea and then things start going wrong, and then you start getting anxious about it, and then you're like, oh my God, my plan's not worked out. And in the end, I think I've taken a long route to get to where I have been, but I've had fun along the way. There's no rush in life. It's important to, I think, you know, look at the opportunities that are offered to you, choose wisely when they come. And yeah, don't worry, it will be okay. It really will be for most people, as long as you just take one step at a time and don't run before you walk. I think, I don't know, yeah, maybe. I'm sure if I thought about it for longer, I'd have wiser words.
No, I think those were absolutely great suggestions. It tends to work out at the end of the day. And in the meantime, have fun, because life is all about the journey. And if you are stressed all the time, you're going to miss out on those opportunities as and when they present themselves to you. So,
Yeah,
thank you so much, Maryann. This was a great conversation. I wish you all the very best, you and John, for Christmas and New Year. Stay
thank
safe,
you.
stay healthy, and everyone else out there who's been following us. Stay safe, stay healthy, have a wonderful holiday period, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thanks, Elsa. Bye.
Bye.